All right, everybody, welcome back. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome back to Exposure. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and you're going to want to share this one, folks, because we got an awesome special guest who's willing to come on with us today. Sandy Juno from Wisconsin, former Brown County elections clerk. Sandy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Hey, you know what? I was just telling you off air, I wanted to thank you for the yeoman's work that you're doing. And I mean, there's a lot to get to in this interview. I do want to start off with people kind of getting them up to speed on who you are, what your role was. And so could you give us your title that you were in at the time of the election and what your role was during the November 3rd election?
Okay, I'm the former Brown County clerk. I recently retired at the end of the year. In my role as Brown County clerk, I was the election manager for our 24 municipal jurisdictions in Brown County. So I wasn't involved necessarily with the issuance of ballots or election day poll workers. My whole oversight was in creating the election, making sure all of our municipalities had the programming for their tabulators, and everyone was ready to go on election day. So mine was really oversight at the end of the night when all of the jurisdictions close their poll. My responsibility was to collect all the election results and provide that information to our state.
And how long were you in that role?
I served as Brown County clerk for 8 years, and prior to that, I was 14 years as the chief deputy county clerk, so about 22 years in elections.
Okay, so you obviously have quite a bit of experience dealing with elections, dealing with the processes that go involved into it. I want to start this off right off the bat. What was your experience like leading up to the November 3rd election? How was it different than the elections before?
Well, obviously, we were all in a COVID situation, which was new. We hadn't had anything like that before. But my problems with the city of Green Bay actually started for our April presidential preference election. Normally, the city of Green Bay would have 33 different polling locations to accommodate 48 wards. And about a week before the election, I was informed that they were going down to 2 polling locations. And that was a major concern for me.
And that's never happened before, correct?
Correct.
Did you have any dealings with the absentee ballot procedures before the election?
Other than providing the absentee ballots to the municipal clerks, that was our role as a county government. As they needed additional ballots, we were able to provide them to them. But as always, we have state statutes that dictate how absentee voting is to take place. And the full expectation is that the clerks would follow those laws and procedures.
What is the role of a municipal clerk for those who don't know in Wisconsin?
Okay, in Wisconsin, our municipal clerks, and there's 1,850 approximately, their role is to provide poll workers and take care of the polling locations. They also handle the voter registration and all voter activity. So if someone wants to vote absentee, they need to get the request from the absentee voter. They need to process the ballot to get it out to the voter, and then they also receive the ballot after it's voted.
And this is where I think some of the third party concerns come in with the absentee ballots, because they were helped being processed by a third party, correct?
Correct. Never before have we had a third party involved with a government function in regard to elections. And that's where my issue comes in with the integrity to the election that took place in November.
Now, can you kind of recap your experience with the CTCL, with the National Vote at Home Institute, and ultimately the gentleman who came in, Mr. Michael Spitzer Rubenstein? Did you have any direct contact with him?
No. Not with Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. The first I was aware of what was going on was actually 1 week prior to our November election. I did receive an email from Mr. Spitzer Rubenstein asking about the election tabulators that were to be located at their central count location. And this person was unknown to me. With all the security we've addressed over the last 4 years to make sure that everything is taken care of, is secure. It seemed very odd to me to have someone from an outside organization stating they're representing Green Bay and asking me about tabulation equipment.
Did you have reservations about giving him information at the time?
Correct. I talked to my corporation counsel, and we decided that since he wasn't a government employee, I was not going to respond to his request. However, I did contact the Wisconsin Elections Commission, who oversees elections in Wisconsin, and I talked to the director there about my concerns. And she advised me that she knew some municipalities were working with third parties, and she stated that she had gone over what the roles would be, and that if there was any issues, that would be up to the municipality to take care of. Because my concern was having outside organizations coming into Wisconsin, not knowing Wisconsin election laws, where policies and procedures, were things being handled correctly.
And that's the head of the Wisconsin Election Commission at the time was Claire Woodall-Log, correct?
No, that would have been Megan Wolf.
Megan
She
Wolf.
was the Elections Commission administrator.
Okay.
Claire Woodall-Log was the elections clerk for the city of Milwaukee.
Okay. Well, I know also in that dealings, you said they gave you information, or you just talked about giving them or giving you information about they knew what roles they were put in. I also read something that you were in connection with the Wisconsin Election Commission staff attorney, Mr. Nathan Judnick. Judnick, is that how you pronounce his name?
Yes, he is their staff attorney. After I had found out about Mr. Spitzer Rubenstein and the unprecedented move of taking our central count out of Green Bay City Hall and moving it to an off-site location, and this all took place in less than a week prior to the election. I mean, that was just unprecedented, never happened.
Were you involved in that decision at all?
No, no. My understanding is the mayor of Green Bay made that decision, and it was about that time that the Green Bay city clerk left on a medical leave.
And that was Chris Teskey.
Correct.
So after you learned about that, you were dealing with the lawyer for the attorney for the WEC?
What happened was, after I found out of Spitzer Rubenstein, and the move to an offsite location, I was really concerned as to what was all going on. So on election day, myself and 2 other Brown County employees did go to the central count location because my concern again was whether the laws, policies, and procedures were being followed. So we spent some time there in the morning, made some observations. And one of the observations that I made was that Michael Spitzer Rubenstein wasn't an observer. He was actively involved with what was going on at Central Count. He had his hands on the ballots. He was working with the poll workers. He had his own table within the Central Count location with a laptop and printer. And he moved about the whole facility with ease. So that did not appear to be someone that was just observing. So we did try and identify what his role was because he had a lanyard with a name tag on, but it was flipped. So in trying to identify him for sure, I think we did ask someone else at the location if that's who he was. And, they said, yes, that was him, but they would not tell us what his role was. Was he a city employee? Was he an observer? Was he an election worker? We really needed to know what was his role because depending on his role, determined, first of all, whether he could legally be there. And second of all, whether he had access and involvement with the actual processing of absentee ballots. Now, when we tried to talked to him, he just walked away from us. He didn't respond to our questions, which gave us even more concern that he was so evasive about his role there. So when I got back to my office, I did send an email to Nathan Judnick stating what I observed at Central Count and told him that I felt that Michael Spitzer Rubenstein's presence at the Central Count location really called to question the integrity of the election.
Why would someone in his position be able or have the ability to touch ballots physically or to have a laptop on location at his own desk? Why would that happen?
That's a good question. First of all, he's from Brooklyn, New York, so he's out of state. Second of all, we didn't know what his role was, and to this day, we're actually not really have established exactly what the purpose of the laptop and printer were. He seemed to be collecting data throughout the day. And since, from our research onto the organizations that he was associated with, being very liberal and Democrat based, we were really concerned that he was passing information possibly on to those organizations regarding Central Count.
Now, since Central Count was moved from City Hall over to the KI Center, he had there was a lot of discussion about curing ballots. And I just want to kind of bring the audience up to speed. What is involved in actually curing a ballot?
When an absentee voter returns their ballot to the clerk's office, there's some essential things that need to be on the return envelope. First of all, the elector's signature, and then second of all, the witness's signature and address. Now, if all of those elements are not on the envelope, then it becomes an invalid ballot. So when the clerks have time, they will contact the elector and say, your ballot is rejected at this time because we are missing either your address or your signature, the elector's address or signature. And at that time, the elector will have an opportunity to come in and correct it. Or if there's enough time, the election clerk will return it to that particular elector to complete correctly. That is how a cured ballot should occur. What was happening in Wisconsin was clerks were actually saying, well, I know where this person lives, so they were completing that portion of the envelope. That's an illegal function. That is not their role to do that. They should have been returning them. And Michael Spitzer's Rubenstein was pressuring the city of Green Bay to take part with his organization to do those ballot curing. So that would have been an illegal activity taken over by a third party. However, Chris Teskey was very adamant that she did not need his help and would not go along with that request.
I'm puzzled. I'm puzzled, Sandy, because this is a situation where third-party access to curing ballots from outside sourced money comes in to do illegal activities within a swing state, put there by the Wisconsin Election Commission and pressured by the mayor of one of the biggest cities in the state. I don't understand how this isn't raising more red flags among officials in Wisconsin, among people who are able to take action on this, amongst litigation in Wisconsin. Why hasn't this raised more red flags?
The average elector is not even aware that this took place. I think the thing that is most concerning of all is our 5 most populous municipalities with a Democratic base were involved in this grant in a combined fashion. They referred to themselves as the Wisconsin 5. So we had Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee, Madison, and Green Bay all working together in a combined effort. It was one grant that was issued for all 5. It's becoming more and more clear that the manner in which it was handled, we believe that most alder people for those municipalities never really saw the actual agreement as to what the conditions were in this grant. And more concerning than anything is if the conditions were not met, CTCL had full capability of clawing back those grant dollars, making the municipality return those grant funds back to CTCL. So there's an implied threat there is, okay, you need to do what we're asking you to do. Otherwise, you're going to need to repay those funds. So in my, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
So in my mind, when you have a grant set up that way, you actually have a third-party organization coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to pay you to play in this election. And essentially, I think that's what happened.
Well, and that's also illegal under Wisconsin law as well. From what I understand, it wasn't illegal to have people as consultants because the clerks and the elections officials that went out and canvassed have to make the decisions. But these people took over the entire election. I mean, it wasn't like they were just there to say, all right, well, we're here to help in any way we can. I mean, these people pushed out the Green Bay election clerk, Chris Teskey, inserted themselves into that situation and took over the entire operation.
Correct. When they accepted the grant from the Center for Technology and Civic Life, they also accepted working with those partner organizations, which are all Democratic based. So what you did is then open the door to have all these outside organizations come in and take over different aspects of your election, such as redesigning materials, sending in what we have recently learned about called voter navigators, which is something we've never had before. And those particular duties are very concerning in itself. But in all aspects of the election, you had these third-party involvement. And it wasn't like each of those 5 municipalities went out and found their own consultants. They were pressured from CTCL to use their consultants. So that in itself, is really concerning.
What was the role of a navigator? You said you've never had that before. What was their role?
Well, there still is some uncertainty as to what it was, but from what we're seeing is it was a way for them to embed staff following their organization's needs and wants into the municipal staff. So thus we had voter navigators who came in the city of Green Bay. The clerk fully expected these hired staff to come in and work in her department. However, they weren't. They were working in the mayor's office, and they weren't working in the city hall. They were going out into the communities, doing a lot of activist roles and IDing certain populations of minorities and ethnic groups to target, to get them registered, help them vote, and make sure their ballots got returned. So that's going way overboard. I mean, a jurisdiction provides the election resources, but the municipality's role is not to go out and solicit particular people to vote in an election.
And you're talking about essentially ballot harvesting, Sandy. I mean, there was a democracy in the park situation that I was talking with Dan O'Donnell about. He called it fraud in the park because they basically had drop boxes or bags throughout all these major cities' parks where they picked up 17,000 ballots from people who just dropped off their ballot at that location. I mean, that is put in place not by the state of Wisconsin, but rather these players that came in to suggest that this should be a procedure that you go through, and it worked.
Well, exactly. By hiring these voter navigators to go out and collect these ballots and having them on the city's payroll, that's how they got around the quote of ballot harvesting, who is typically someone outside of government who is collecting absentee ballots. So it was a very well thought out plan on behalf of the CTCL, how they would skirt these laws. But most concerning of all was the fact that they paid to have these things happen.
When did those people become a part of the city's payroll?
I believe sometime in late August or September. It would have been after, I believe, our primary election. And from my understanding is voter navigators were used in all 5 of the Wisconsin 5 cities.
Who approved them to be on the city's payroll?
I believe it might have been part of the grant. So I'm not sure if indirectly it was approved by the city councils. I know in the city of Green Bay, I did see the processing go through their HR department, and also questions as to who the voter navigators were going to report to. The typical place for them to be reporting would be in the city clerk's office. However, that did not happen.
So you just mentioned the city councils, and the Green Bay City Council specifically approved the grants and the stipulations that came with it. Why? Why would they do that if this is an unprecedented situation that goes against Wisconsin state law? Why would the city councils do that?
I don't know for sure that they ever saw the actual agreement with all the conditions listed, or we were even informed that there was those clawback clauses in there where they'd have to return the money. I think they were given a resolution that was drafted by the city of Racine and on behalf of the Wisconsin 5 municipalities, and that resolution was actually what went to the city council. So it had limited information, and I don't think they were fully aware of what the ramifications of accepting this grant were.
Who coordinated the Wisconsin Five to send out these kind of collective cities informational tools to these other city clerks around the state?
I believe it started with the city of Racine. They got $100 grant from CTCL to go out and recruit these other municipalities. So they were the ones that initiated the contact with Milwaukee, Madison, Kenosha, and Green Bay. When these other cities signed on to being a part of this grant, each one of those cities got $10,000 for, quote, grant planning. Kind of interesting.
Who got $10,000?
Each of the cities. And
where did that money go?
I have no idea. I don't think anyone's ever really said. However, Racine did get the 60,000, but each of the other 4 municipalities got 10,000. So
that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then after they received the 10,000, they basically just went along with what the directive said from Racine.
Well, once they all agreed to it and they applied for this grant and it was accepted and it went through their boards and that was approved, then they were ready to move forward with their plan. So from that point on, I really believe that's where the municipal clerks in those cities started to lose control of what was happening with the elections administration.
So Racine's mayor at the time, if I'm not mistaken, was Corey Mason, correct?
Yes.
What was his connection to the CTCL or the National Vote at Home Institute?
Well, everything came through the CTCL. These other organizations were, quote, partners to them. So they came along kind of with the deal. I don't know that was even known when they accepted the grant, all of these, quote, partners that were going to be a part of the process. I'm not sure who had the connection with CTCL. Clearly, it must have been somebody in the city of Racine that they were the first contacted and then went out to recruit the other municipalities.
I mean, Sandy, it sounds like there's a lot of dereliction of duty at the very least amongst these city councils that just went along with the information without questioning it at all, and potentially culpability at the very worst if they knew about it and still went through with these situations anyway. I guess I'm a little flabbergasted as to why these city councils would go along with it without questioning what's happening if this is a procedure that doesn't normally happen. And then also, who ended up getting the connection between Racine and the CTCL, and how strong that connection was? Because I think therein lies the crux of the whole situation. When the CTCL entered Wisconsin, it was early in the game, and they came up from Chicago, and they almost used you guys as a kind of a guinea pig for the rest of the country to implement these procedures. And so you guys were getting information back in July and August and moving up obviously until the election, whereas Arizona and places like Nevada were getting them in late September, early October. And so it just seems like there's so much lack of communication that's what they use to further pushing this forward without any pushback from anybody else.
Well, actually, I think from what we're finding through emails is that this coordination with the 5 mayors goes back as far as even May.
Wow.
And when they were meeting, there was no public notice given that they were meeting or what they were discussing. So there's some questions there whether there was a violation of, open meetings. So this goes back a lot further. We do know that Corey Mason and Erick Gingrich were in the Wisconsin legislature together, so they knew each other prior to. So, I don't know how Wisconsin got picked, other than the fact that we're a swing state. We're very important to how the election would have came down. We're very close to Chicago, and somehow there had to been some type of connection or interaction between Racine and CTCL that's where this whole process really began.
You mentioned Erick Gingrich, the mayor of Green Bay. What were your dealings like with him throughout this entire process?
Not good. Our problem started in, like I said, with the April presidential preference, when he changed the number of polling locations down to 2. At that time, my staff and I went to the clerk and said that this is not good. We knew they, a week prior to the election, they had over 18,000 absentee ballots requests that were not even been processed yet. And so just looking at the numbers, you knew very well they weren't going to have time to get those all sent out, nor even the ones that they did send out would be returned in a timely manner to be tabulated on election day. So there was huge concerns there, and we had no voice in that decision. It was going to be 2, and that was it. And that was the reason was given because of COVID. And even to get into City Hall was not something that could happen. They weren't answering their phones. They weren't replying to emails. The building was in lockdown. So just to have communication with them was nearly impossible. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I know that there's also somebody that was a city official that was trying to figure out whether or not they could live stream the central count from City Hall. Is that correct?
That was for November. I believe they wanted to live stream it. The way it would have been set up in City Hall, it would have been over a couple different floors. And I think that's where, they use that as an excuse to move it into another location.
Yeah.
Which they did. And they did have live streaming on the day of the election there. However, for whatever reason, that footage is not available.
Is it normally available, or is there normally live streaming?
No, normally there is not live streaming. However, we were under the understanding that it was being recorded. Had it been available, we would have been able to go back and quite pointedly show exactly what Mr. Rubenstein Spitzer was doing. They have a number of excuses as to why that footage is not available.
What are their excuses?
One was it was too long and it only could save up to so much. Inadvertently, I did hear that someone there had deleted it, so we really haven't gotten a solid answer back from the city on that. All we know is that footage isn't available.
Who has that? Who has the footage, supposedly?
Well, it was the company that was handling it would have been arranged to the city of Green Bay. I don't know if it would have been their information technology director or if it would have been somebody within the mayor's office. But it was very disappointing to find out that we could not have access to it because it supposedly it doesn't exist.
And that was throughout the KI Center that footage was taken, correct?
It was taken in the ballroom of where Central Count was taking place. So people on the outside could actually view what was happening at Central Count, although the room was so large, other than seeing people move around, you really couldn't see a lot of anything.
Right.
However, being able to see Mr. Spitzer Rubenstein's movement within that facility would have been very helpful,
Yeah.
but we don't have that. And I think the other thing is, upon reviewing the contract that the city of Green Bay had set up with this facility, there was 5 keys issued to this ballroom, 4 of which in the contract state they were to be given to Mr. Spitzer Rubenstein, and the 5th one held by the hotel itself. So there's question as to why would you give someone who has no affiliation or accountability to the city of Green Bay 5 keys to a Central Count location that needs to be secured, especially several days prior to the actual Central Count processing. So that was a red flag for us. The other red flag was that there was 3 internet lines, 2 of which were available to the public, and the third one referred to as hidden. And we have interest in trying to find out who is using the hidden SSID and to what websites that was accessing.
Yeah, I saw an email that was leaked saying Spitzer Rubenstein needs to have access, or this is the password that he needs to have access to the sensitive machines. And those were the words that was used in quotations, the sensitive machines. Well, what is on those sensitive machines? What are they used for? Why are they considered sensitive? What is the password? Why are they hooked up to the internet in the first place? I mean, these are all legitimate questions that should be answered.
Correct. And when the city council met last week, someone did ask about whether they had gotten information from the provider as to what internet sites had been accessed on the hidden line. And her response was that she had inquired, hadn't gotten a response, so she assumed no one had accessed anything on that hidden line.
This, what you just said, is it sounds like the overarching theme of Wisconsin. Well, I don't know. This lady saying, I don't know who had access to that or where the machine's IP addresses went, so I'm just assuming that it was on the up and up. City council saying, well, we're not really sure the stipulations of where the money is going, or we're not told, and so we're just going to go along with what the mayors are telling us. Erick Genrich putting in Rubenstein. Well, this doesn't seem like it's up to code. Chris Teskey, the bravery of her to put it in email documentation and then later to be debased in front of Congress. I can't remember her name, Representative. I don't even remember her name, but she said that, we're not basing these hearings off of feelings of someone feeling pressured. We're basing these feelings off of fact. Well, guess what? Chris Teskey documenting a procedure held by an outside source that is forcing her into a position to do things that are against Wisconsin election state law is not just a feeling. I mean, that's a fact that's going on. The fact that all of this stuff is being shirked and kind of just pushed off to the side, that the media is not covering this, that you have to come on a show like this. And I thank you for doing so, because what you've been doing with your hearings in front of Congress and the courage it's taken for you to come out and give your firsthand experience is, we shouldn't be having this conversation, Sandy. Honestly, we should be allowing our elected officials to have free and fair elections without questions, with total transparency. And here we are, May 15th, 2021, on a Saturday morning, talking about the procedures that were done illegally in one of the most consequential states in the nation. Like, this is the theme of Wisconsin. It's mind-boggling to me. And you could obviously sense my frustration in this, because there are so many emails, there are so many Zoom meetings, there are so many documented incidences in this entire state's election situation that can be referenced in moving forward with some type of integrity, looking back to say, okay, we need to have Wisconsin election integrity, not only moving forward. Thank you for the legislator putting those laws out there and getting election integrity for the people moving forward in 2022 and beyond. But we need to look back at the procedures that happened that were illegal in this state. And I'm just not sure why that's not happening.
Well, first of all, the only people in the state of Wisconsin who have the authority statutorily to run an election is a clerk. So the mayor's involvement in this to begin with, or anyone else's, was strictly a violation of state law. They shouldn't have been involved in this process. They too are elected officials. And to think that they would have the that they would think they're above the law and being able to insert themselves into these elections is just absurd to me. But most of the issues here that happened in Wisconsin was because certain people tried to find a way to skirt the law. And when they did, and a lawsuit was filed, they thought, well, just, it'll have to go through the courts, which takes forever.
Right.
And by that time, it's too late. So for them, the end justifies the means, whether they're doing activities that are illegal or not. And I think that to me is the most frustrating part, is that we have the laws, they're not being followed. And when they don't follow them, it's like, okay, well then sue us. And then you end up in the courts. And by then it's just too late.
And I think that's the number one thing. You hit the nail on the head. I think that's exactly what they wanted out of this entire process. They wanted to do first and apologize later rather than ask for permission beforehand. And I think they wanted to muck this up in the courts as much as they could to push off any questions from November 3rd all the way up to January 20th and beyond, which is what they're still doing. They want to get this into a court battle. They want to make it a semantical battle, a battle of little nuts and bolts procedures wise, but we didn't do anything illegal and it was approved by the city council. This is what they wanted. And I think I share in your frustration, Sandy, that this is going into the court, or this should go further into the courts a lot faster than it has been, that this has been shirked. This has been shunned. Why do you think that this has been slow rolled so much in Wisconsin at this point?
Well, first of all, I don't think the courts like to have to get involved in this election stuff. Many of the courts have much bigger issues to deal with, abuse, murders, drugs, you name it. So dealing with elections, may seem like something that doesn't rank in their top priorities. So there we have the courts not willing to really want to take this stuff on. However, it's really not doing the population justice, because when they're not addressing these issues, they're basically saying, go ahead and do it. There's no ramifications for breaking the laws.
That's the whole point. That is what this is about, is if we don't get election integrity right. Yeah, I understand there's always going to be court cases that are out there that are important, but this is like the most dire need of our time. I mean, this was coordinated, like you said, potentially from all the way back to May and even before that, leading up to one of the most consequential elections in our country's history, in one of the most critical states that had an outcome in this election. I mean, we're not talking about even Dominion machines hooked up to any type of internet. We're not talking about fraudulent ballots at this point. I mean, we're talking about strict Wisconsin state law that the courts have an obligation to hear, at the very least, with evidence provided by anybody who's willing to provide this evidence. Now, I've interviewed Erick Kaardal before on this program of the Thomas More Society, and he's been, gathering complaints and everything to try to put, litigation battles into this. But like you said, Sandy, they're just going to keep pushing and pushing until it becomes too late, like you said. And then at that point, there's no recourse. And so I guess what, in your opinion, what would you say to the people out there that are watching this interview of Wisconsin? What would you say to the people of Wisconsin? What can they do? How can they take action? In your opinion, where can they go to move this forward?
That's a question, because certainly mainstream media does not want to cover this. 4 years ago, when supposedly the Russians had hacked our systems, that was all over the news. I mean, that I would consider would be a third party involvement in our election. Okay, now we have CTCL, who literally pay us to come in and take over our elections with conditions on what we must do, and the media is not covering it. To me, that's a huge frustration. So people don't have the access to the information. A third party is a third party, whether it's a domestic organization or a foreign. And I guess it's really frustrating to see how, in one instance, it's blowing up all over the media and people are all in a tither. And in the other area, when it comes up, you have a mayor calling me a racist or a Republican operative. Name calling comes into place and trying to discredit myself from exposing what's going on.
Yeah, we got to shirk that. I mean, I am incredibly sorry that would even happen to you, for actually standing up to tell your account of what happened. But at a certain point, and I'm talking to the audience at this point, not you, at a certain point, folks, we just have to just shove that off. There's no way that we can sit here and take the Erick Genriches of the world, calling this a Stalinist show trial and a three-ring circus for hearings of questioning that's happening on an election that we know, or at least we're getting information on, massive amounts of information on, that have discrepancies that we need answers to. And the people of Green Bay showed this back on March 12th when they gathered outside of the city hall there and protested. I mean, the people, at least back then, were hungry for answers. And I still believe that the people now are hungry, because I'm getting messages, Sandy, from people in Kenosha, from people in Milwaukee, from people all over the state that are saying, Marcus, what can I do to help? What can I do? I don't know anything. Like, we're obviously, like you said, the media is not talking about it. But I think at a certain point, we have to stop relying on others to get us the information, and we have to start digging in ourselves. So do you know, and I'm just going to throw this out there, I don't know if you know this, tell me if you do or not, but do you know if there's any Wisconsin state law or anything in the Wisconsin Constitution that allows people to, they themselves run a citizen jury or have citizen kind of gatherings where they can bring it to the courts themselves?
I'm not really aware of that. That's probably more of a question for someone like Erick Kaardal, who's very familiar with the laws and the violations here. What I tend to do is, when I do see something that's on social media relating what's happening in these municipalities, I do whatever I can to share it and make people aware. So, I would say, even within your own social media, make sure you share it and let people know that this indeed did happen. Um, we don't like to think of there being not integrity in our elections, but in this case, we know certainly there was violations of law that most people are not aware of. And I think they need to be aware of, because if it doesn't change before 2022, I think it's going to open the gate for a lot more violations and third-party interference. That's my concern. We can't change what happened in 2020 as far as the elections go. That's not what our purpose is in these lawsuits right now. Our purpose is to say, let's deal with these third parties. And if they're going to be involved, make sure that there's some kind of a screening process where money and conditions are going through the proper channels. Because right now, they went directly to the municipalities, and there really aren't laws that we have that can step in and say, you can't take this money. So we really have to look at how we can change our laws to govern any third party involvement or money. Personally, I just think they don't belong in an election process.
I can't believe they're allowed now, to be honest with you. It's basically saying anybody who has any sort of financial interest in this election can either form a nonprofit organization, or they themselves bring in third-party money, with stipulations at this point to enact whatever procedures they want to fulfill an outcome, a desired outcome within the election that they have a desire to fulfill that outcome in. And I'm not even sure how that's legal right now.
Yeah, and that's the big question. I think that's what the Amistad project is working on with the St. Thomas More Society, is to say we need to look at this. I don't think it is legal to take that money, but they did, and it's done. But we need to stop it for the future.
And I do agree with you, Sandy. And this is on my personal note. I do think that people should continue to go back and look at the 2020 election and all the election laws that were broken in that, because where there is smoke, there is fire. And I do believe that if people have the understanding of the law of the Wisconsin Constitution, they can not only expose this, which is what we're doing right now, but they can potentially get an outcome that they can find out the information that forced the outcome for what it is and potentially get that outcome reversed. Because if these election laws were broken, which led to ineligible ballots, that state was not won by, I can't remember the exact vote count it was won by for President Biden, but do you know the state count that was won by?
I think there was a difference of 20,000 votes throughout the state, so it was pretty close. But the thing of it is, when we have even the U.S. Supreme Court and the state Supreme Court and our local judges who aren't willing to take these cases, it doesn't give you a lot of hope for getting change done. And even with all the laws our legislature are putting together now to try and make things a little bit more secure legislatively, we fully expect that our governor, Tony Evers, will probably veto them. So, there's a lot of work going into this. Don't necessarily know that we'll have positive results from it, but at least if people are talking about it and calling to question what's going on in our elections, I think that's the important thing.
I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. I do actually want to go back also and tap into something you just said now, and that is, I know that the courts, and this isn't a directive towards you, this is kind of a general comment that I'm making. I know that the courts have given us a lack of hope, but honestly, if we don't have the hope that we can carry this out and find the legal ramifications to put forth to exact the justice that was done, the injustice to right the wrongs that was done against this country, and specifically in this instance, Wisconsin, then we've lost the freedom that we enjoy in this country to say the citizens have the power and the authority to find out the information, because we have more power than we think, than the state legislature, than the judicial system. And I just think hope is all we have. And I know that Wisconsin, I can tell from even the tepidness in your voice. I can tell from the people that I've talked to around the state in Wisconsin. I can tell from the frustrations that I've heard from people like Dan O'Donnell in his interview. A lot of questions, but we're about action on this show. I want to put people into a position where they can move forward with confidence, knowing that they at least have some recourse in finding out the truth. We're exposing the truth, and then we put people into motion. We're not just going to sit here and say, all right, well, there's the truth and just deal with it. I mean, this is an actionable show, and I think we have to keep that hope. Otherwise, what do we have? I don't know if we have anything at that point. Sandy would just say, well, they did it to us. I guess we'll just move on. And that's not how this country works. We have laws in place. We have the Constitution in place, and we have justice. And they're fighting this right now out in Arizona. They're fighting this tooth and nail out in New Hampshire right now. Obviously, Matt DePerno in Michigan, the case there, they're debasing and trying to defile his name and everything, but they're still moving forward. It's like there has to be some type of recourse for this, because if we don't take action, then it's all for naught. Like you said, it'll happen in the future, and we'll just forget about it in the past. And that's what they want. And I just can't, me personally, I can't allow that to happen. I just can't.
Well, that's why myself and those of us that are working with the Voter Alliance in Wisconsin and the plaintiffs filing these cases, that's why we're involved in this process, because we do want change to occur. However, like I said, it's very difficult when you have a media that isn't asking the questions that are necessary. We need to go back to when we had investigative media people. Now it's like whatever they want to do is just state the narrative that's been put out before them by their headquarters. And until we get to the point where we see where, asking questions and getting answers is going to help us move forward. But right now, I think we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Well, and you're doing that work right now, and I know that you've been such an instrumental part in this entire Wisconsin process. So again, I want to thank you personally for what you're doing out there, for what you've done, for all the hearings, the testimony that you've given, for the emails, for the I'm sure the 21 years of work that you saw leading up to this point, that you knew what you were seeing and tried to document it as best you could. Thank you, Sandy, for everything you've done.
Yes, and I do want to thank Chris Teskey, the former Green Bay City Clerk, because if it were not for her with having a trail of emails that can document so much of what was happening in Green Bay, we wouldn't probably be here.
Yeah.
We have the evidence that we need. Unfortunately, she needed to leave her job because of the situation, and she's still hurting to this day, but she is what I would call a hero because she did the right thing.
She absolutely did the right thing. And Chris, if you're watching out there, I want to be sensitive to where you're at. I know that I can't imagine what you've gone through personally in this, having your name dragged through the mud, having your credibility questioned in front of your peers. But again, I want to extend a massive, massive thank you to you, as well as Sandy, because what you did, like Sandy said, is one of the most courageous things that happened in Wisconsin throughout this entire process. And I do want to extend an invitation out to you, Chris. Again, I want to be sensitive to you, but if you're willing to come on and talk about your testimony and what happened in the situation, I'd love to have you on, but I don't want to pressure you at all. But people would love to hear from you. And this is not a mainstream media source. We're not here to fulfill a narrative. We're not here for an agenda. I'm not getting paid for this. I literally just want to talk to you. And if you're willing to do that, please come on. If not, I completely understand. But Sandy, we're going to end this right now. I want to thank you again for coming on. Thank you for answering all of my questions as best you could. This is an incredible situation in Wisconsin, and I think people want to exact action, and I think they have the opportunity to do so. Why don't you hang out for just a second? I want to end this broadcast. I want to say goodbye to you off the air. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Share this with your friends. I'm not doing this for the views. I don't care how many subscribers we have. Yeah, we're up to over 5,000, thank goodness. But that's just a vehicle to get the message out even more. I mean, Neil Johnson's been exposing things. He's got over 23,000. Nick Moseder, he's up to 40,000 now. He's been pushing on Pennsylvania and Arizona. Obviously, Behizy has a large following. Cann, Doug Tennapel, all these guys are pushing election integrity and finding the truth. We're trying to figure out the truth. So go subscribe to their channels, subscribe to my channel, share this interview with Sandy. And Sandy, I'll say goodbye to you in just a second.